all for your patience, both to the panelists and all the attendees. We also are tuning into Facebook Live, so those of you who have joined us there, welcome again. And as you saw from the chat, we have people who've joined us from everywhere, from Brazil to Canada to Virginia to Tunis. So it's wonderful to have you all here. My name is Mohammed Samji, and I'm here today in my capacity as one of the Jadaliyya photography and audiovisual narratives co-editors. It launched a few hours ago, which is why we're all really excited. It is a new page, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. I'm based in Dubai. I'm a photographer and curator and a director of Gulf Photo Plus, which is a center for photography based here in Dubai, where we run an active educational and arts program and serve as a platform for photographers to share and disseminate their work. I'm really honored and privileged to be part of a team that has been working hard to finally bring the Jadaliyya photography and audiovisual narratives page to the world, along with, and in no particular order, Tania Habjuka, Abdul Shanan, Mariam Al-Arab, Mariam Al-Khasawne, and Faris Trish, and of course, the wonderful core team of Jadaliyya, who you saw recently, just now, MK, but also Bassam Haddad, Kylie Broderick, and Ziad Aburish from Beirut. And you can learn more about the team on the page. And it's a wonderful group of people that I'm honored and privileged to work with and learn from. So let me just take a very quick moment to tell you what this new photography and audiovisual narratives page is about and the objectives behind it. So first of all, it's actually not a new page. It's kind of a relaunch. There used to be a photography page run by Michelle Woodward. So this is kind of a reset, and we're excited to get started. So this page will live online within the Jadaliyya ecosystem to showcase and explore visual narratives from the Middle East and the North Africa region. This page will not only serve as a knowledge resource, but also as a platform through which to expand perspectives related to how the region is represented, how communities see themselves and one another. We're really hoping to enhance opportunities for narration from within the region to find meaningful ways to collaborate with artists, curators, researchers, and collectives working to create and amplify their own platforms. And our hope really is to open a space of nuanced narrative construction, while at the same time support the growing field of photography in the region. We want to stay away from the forced flatlining and linear narration that are usually very accommodating to mainstream Western regional publications, where often nuance is lacking. And we want to instead celebrate the expanded approach of multi-platform and multimedia and the complexities of our stories. We want to get personal because the personal is political. The innovation of storytelling in our region to find ways to circumvent political suppression to tell our stories has never been stronger, and we want to fully embrace that. So we launched this morning with a focus on Algeria, since we've celebrated their Independence Day on the 5th, and have a fantastic bouquet of articles. You can see there's an article by Samia Henny that through the use of military photographs tells the violent history of the military-controlled camps that the French army created in Algeria during the revolution. There is a wonderful article that is spearheaded by Safiya Delta called My Mother is a Stranger and I Love Her, that takes the mother figure as a starting point to explore the complexity of notions on belonging, roots, and family ties. And this is told through the work of 7 fantastic Algerian women photographers. And I'll leave this to you to explore the many wonderful articles on the Jadaliyya page. So please take a moment to explore through them. And that brings me to why we're all gathered here tonight. To discuss this wonderful film, Battle of Algiers. I really can't think of a better film to connect what we're trying to do with the Jadaliyya page than Guillaume Pontecorvo's film. To start with, you know, he worked as a photojournalist for a short stint when he was in Paris after leaving Italy, when he was accused of, because of anti-Semitic regions, he left to Paris and he worked as a photojournalist. So there's a rootedness of image making in his influence as a director. He was at the time very innovative with the use of this grainy black and white film stock that resulted in a compelling outcome that you've all seen, of course. And Algeria has been such a focal point in the counter-revolutionary narratives, not just in our region, but also beyond. And similarly, we hope that with our page to nurture connections around the region, around the kind of, you know, the global world that are looking to kind of find their voices and give their voices a platform. And, you know, the political and cultural impact that the Battle of Algiers film has had on the world and its viewers has been immense, you know, from many, many aspects, you know, politically, culturally, you know, and how important the image has been and propaganda, and it's been used by everybody from the Pentagon to film schools, schools that teach Arabic studies on campuses, art house cinema enthusiasts. I mean, you name it. So, but the last and not least reason to have this discussion is an excuse to invite Butheina Kazim and her wonderful cohort of people to discuss this film. Butheina is the founder of Cinema Akil, an independent art house cinema here in Dubai. In fact, the first in the country and in the region. She's a Fulbright Scholar of Media, Culture and Communication at NYU, and has also produced a short documentary, Letters to Palestine, which won the Special Jury Prize at the Abu Dhabi Film Festival. And Cinema Akil really is like the perfect ally for something like this initiative that we're trying to do. They've been a wonderful antidote to the proliferation of like these massive megaplex cinemas, not just in Dubai and the region, but also in the region. And they've been elevating the film scene here in the Emirates with very thoughtful and considered programming of films throughout the year through pop-ups outside of their one theater, one screen space. And their work to elevate and expand cinematic appreciation is tremendous. And it's brave and important work, and a riposte to those who say that there is a lack of critical engagement in the Gulf. They're the perfect ally, as I said, to what we're trying to do with Jadaliyya, and hopefully, and I'll make sure that this won't be the last time that Cinema Akil and Butheina will make an appearance on this page, and that I'm sure of. So before I pass the baton on to Butheina and her wonderful guests, who she'll introduce, I just want to talk about the housekeeping. We'll get your questions through the Zoom app, so please feel free to ask your questions. We'll address them at the end of the first round of discussion, which is going to be about 40 minutes. And some of you who are joining on Facebook Live will also please address your questions there, and we'll try and get them to me, and I'll try and curate the questions and get through as many as we can. So with that, Butheina, if you unmute yourself and join us, we'd love to get started. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Muhammad, and thank you to the entire team of Jadaliyya. And congratulations on the new photography and audiovisual narratives page marked by the Algerian Independence Day on Sunday. And thank you to all my co-discussants joining us today and sharing their time and their reflections in this discussion, engaging with this discussion. Perhaps echoing what your page's declared impetus is trying to achieve to make a critical intervention in the conversations around image production, storytelling, representation in our region. This conversation today starts off with a film that engages with all of those different dimensions and takes on one of the most critically celebrated films of all times. The Battle of Algiers, I mean, I'm pretty sure that most of you have seen it, are familiar with it, have prescribed it at some point, and have engaged with it, but I'll just say a few words on some of the key bullet points worth mentioning as we consider this work. The Battle of Algiers was made in 1966 and is directed by Giro Pontecorvo. It's a very hefty, volatile film, and it could take 3-4 hours of discussion if we were to let this be exclusively centered around the work itself. It's notorious for being credited as the film that documented Algeria's war for independence, perhaps also monopolizing the image of the Falaga or the revolutionary, and imprinting the depiction of resistance to the world. The film critic Roger Ebert problematically wrote, "It is about the Algerian war, but those not interested in Algeria may substitute another war. The Battle of Algiers has a universal frame of reference." And we'll talk a little bit more about this later. It won tons of accolades. I'm listing a few of them here. The Golden Lion at the Venice Film Festival was nominated for 3 Academy Awards, the best film of 1967 by Cuban critics. It was also infamously perhaps contributing to its notoriety. It was banned in France for 5 years. The torture scenes in the film were cut from versions distributed in Britain and America. So, it achieved this level of fame and critical reception through these different sort of receptions of the film or resistances to the film. Its dramatic score is written by the late Ennio Morricone, who passed away yesterday, who left us yesterday, and contributed immensely to the film world. It's inspired by the 1962 book Remembering the Battle of Algiers, It's based on on Saadi Yacef's account of the revolution, and it's produced by by members of the Algerian Liberation Movement, which makes it particularly unique. Its canonical status is proliferated, in the curricula of film studies. I'm sure a lot of the participants can attest to this. Film studies, post-colonial studies, near and Middle Eastern studies, particularly in North American institutions where I cut my academic teeth. It's one of those films that is a must-see. It has acquired a bit of a mythical status with tremendous influence in the discourse surrounding colonial and subaltern narratives and the representation on screen and beyond. And it's also a film that has been, as you mentioned, Muhammad, weaponized for counter-revolutionary instruction. It's influenced film movements from new cinema and political cinema, including the Palestine Film Unit. So yeah, I mean, it's reverberations and its critical reception. As there's a short documentary that I encourage everybody to see, that I'll share links to later, called "A Dictatorship of Truth," which reflects on Pontecorvo's work, specifically looking at this film, and has also been sort of engaged in the sidelining, perhaps, or the disregard of certain filmmakers, and I think we have a long discussion ahead of us about this, of filmmakers, contemporary filmmakers at the time, that told parallel narratives that perhaps were under the shadow of Pontecorvo's film or monopoly. At Cinema Akil, I mean, we've always adopted an approach of cinema as ricochet. So we've looked at the idea of, how cinema can pose as something of a linchpin for sorts of interpretations and impact. How does it ricochet off the screen, or in this case, multiple screens, to accrue meaning, assign value, and sculpt imaginations? And how does it engage with different bodies of work outside of the cinema sphere? We're interested in effectively, where and how does a film land? So in that vein, this conversation was structured and assembled, by no means, rigidly. It's not meant to be, if you're joining this expecting a lecture on Pontecorvo or the Battle of Algiers, this is not the forum for that. Although we have, many opinions and a legacy of scholarship between the participants on this. It's really not meant to be that didactic, of a discussion. It's more a series of reflections and perhaps aphorisms by our discussants, engaging with the residual mythology of Pontecorvo's film. Our discussant, and you'll see as I introduce them one by one, varied in their vantage points. And as well to those tuning in, because we'll be, attributing, allocating part of this conversation to your reflections and your narratives as you engage with this work. We're attempting to see how the film finds its way into their work, into their disciplines and worlds. Where in their world of work does Pontecorvo's The Battle of Algiers place itself effectively? What meaning does that work, carry? How does it reverberate outside of its time and attributed significance? And how does it find its way into their consciousness, the work, and areas of inquiry and preoccupation? Is it in congruence or in resistance or somewhere in between? So these are all, it's a tall order. It's a conversation I'm looking forward to having. I've asked them, and not in any encompassing framework, but to kind of reflect off of 4 cues, so to speak. The political, led by Hisham Aidi, the personal by Maryam Jalwat Benroya, the poetic explored by Nizar Andari, and the professional by Amin Hatou. But again, these are just cues to get the conversation going. And without further delay, I would love to introduce thoroughly as I can in this time, our discussants. Joining us from New York, Hisham Aidi. Hi, welcome. Thank you for joining today. Hisham Aidi's research interests include cultural globalization and the political economy of race and social movements. He received his PhD in political science from Columbia University and has taught at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs and at the Driscoll Center for the Study of African Diaspora at the University of Maryland, College Park. He is the author of Redeploying the State, a comparative study of neoliberalism and labor movements in Latin America, and co-editor with Manning Marabel of Black Roots to Islam. In 2002-2003, Aidi was a consultant for the UNDP's Human Development Report. From 2000 to 2003, he was a part of Harvard University's Encarta Africana project and worked as a cultural reporter covering youth, culture, and immigration in Harlem and the Bronx for Africana, The New African, and Color Lines. More recently, his work has appeared in The Atlantic, Foreign Affairs, The Nation, and The New Yorker. Since 2007, he has been a contributing editor of Souls, a critical journal of Black culture, politics, and society. Aidi is the author most recently of Rebel Music, Race, Empire, and the New Muslim Youth Culture, a study of American cultural diplomacy and winner of the American Book Award of 2015. Joining us from Dubai, Miriam Jadwat Ben Roya is a leading marketing and strategy executive in the Middle East and Europe, boasting managerial positions at Hermes, Versace Jewelry, and Huawei. Her work has always bridged her dual identity, being the proud daughter of a family coming from Tiaret, Algeria, that relocated in Paris in the 1970s. Her personal exploration led her to co-found Meal World. Meal World is an online media and creative agency exploring Arab identity on a daily basis, which she will talk about later in a sec. Joining us from Algeria, Amin Hatou is an Algerian filmmaker. He directed several short films selected for many festivals around the world. In 2012, he joined the Projecteurs Association and founded in 2015 the Bijaya Film Lab, a film platform dedicated to filmmakers and producers from the Maghreb. He co-founded Dima Cinema in 2019, which is a member of the network, which is our fellow member of the network of Arab art house screens, a consortium or constellation of alternative cinemas across the Middle East and North African region. Dima Cinema is an organization that aims to find new ways to distribute films in Algeria. His first feature film, which we're gonna see a clip of later, his first feature documentary, Jenny 2, is scheduled for autumn 2020. And last but not least, joining us from Abu Dhabi, Nizar Andari received his bachelor's from Columbia University and his PhD from UCLA. To sum up, Andari is passionate about fusion and is an academic writer, filmmaker, and curator. As a film producer and director, Andari's feature documentary entitled Unlocking Doors of Cinema pays respect to an auteur, premiered at the Cairo International Film Festival in 2019. Andari has simultaneously, over the last 4 years, produced over 10 documentary shorts for Arab Film Studio that have screened in over 50 festivals. Andari holds the position of Associate Professor at Zayed University, and his most recent publications include a work on Anthony Shadid, homage to Anthony Shadid, literature of a journalist, as well as a study on Ibn Khaldun in contemporary culture and theater, entitled Confronting the Symbol of the Intellectual. Andari is the co-editor of a book series focused on Arab cinema for Palgrave Macmillan, and has recently published a book entitled Cinema of Muhammad Malas, Visions of a Syrian Auteur, and most recently his series published on the first singular books in Arabic on Arab women auteur. The book is entitled Love and Resistance in the Films of May Masri. Andari has curated various screenings in the UAE over the last 15 years, and currently holds the position of artistic director of Al Sidr Environmental Film Festival in Abu Dhabi. With his own production, Memories of Childhood, a theatrical performance, he introduced the concept of documentary theater to the UAE. And it's my pleasure to welcome Nizar back to the screen. He hosted one of our recent sessions, our Cine Talks series of film discussions. It's our virtual Cine Club at Cinema Akil, which you're all welcome to join. And without further ado, I hand the mic over to Nizar to kick off the session.
Can everyone hear me? Yep. Okay, great. First of all, thank you, Muhammad. Thank you, Jadaliyya, the whole team. Pleasure to be here among all of you and everyone listening. I think I know some of you. Thank you for being there and taking part in these discussions during this COVID era. The very first scene of Battle of Algiers, from this, I don't know how many times I've watched it since undergraduate years, and also teaching it and also graduate school. It's about torture. And you see it, you see the guillotine. Later on in the film, you see a scene with Colonel Mathieu giving the defense of torture. Then you have what a great transition to some actual scenes of what torture was in Algeria. Was it enough? Did it cover everything? No. But yet it was a confrontation with torture. And I sort of begin because the last times I've seen it, it connected to my own, I guess, connection to my father, who in 1950, probably 4, refused to speak French to a Lebanese officer in what was at that time independent Lebanon, I guess. And because of that, he was buried in sand, or he was buried underground for over 12 hours. And yes, he was rebellious at the time. He was against the idea of these current Arab states that many of us are still sometimes in that area, against the borders that have been put in many countries all over the world. And he was quite rebellious against the French language in many ways. But I mean, I guess the question is that it obviously affected him, this attitude towards the state, towards many things, and this legacy of torture. I guess I begin, what will it take to overcome this legacy of violence in our generations and in generations everywhere? How are we going to express ourselves against it in many ways? I mean, as academics, there's many texts that we're always analyzing, from Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punishment, as torture as being part and parcel of the state, part and parcel of colonialism, perhaps part of photography, right? We realize with photography and cinema itself sometimes were things that challenged people's, similarly or akin to torture. And this film really pushed me to question how well is it actually dealing with torture itself? It's a big question that I have. I mean, I think it did a great job for the time, but I think some critics, Algerian critic or Marina Lazrig have criticized it, and in terms of not showing that also women were tortured, so on and so forth. But the film also, for me personally, pushed me to study the before and after of Algeria, to always contextualize the history. The fact that some of the first exiles from Europe into Africa were from Al-Andalus, that Algeria is very diverse and not just the monolith that sometimes when teaching it, Algeria appears to be. Now, perhaps, you know, for this movement, it's important, but it made me understand also the importance of Andalusia, you know, the types of tortures and massacres and elements there that created modernity, I might argue, right? The very fact that the first US invasion overseas, we could say, is in the North African area, right? We know, if for film buffs, you could have watched Tripoli from 1950 about this invasion that was basically with 8 Marines and 400 mercenaries of Arabs and Greeks and Turks and a mix that actually fought in Libya at the time. We know how important it was. I think the film pushed me to understand the importance of a figure like Abdel Qadir in Algeria, and his relationship to photography itself is important. He himself believed in some mystical relationship to photography. Photography and colonialism are directly connected, and we see this through the work of Malik Alula in the ways that I would say women were tortured somehow with the photograph, and that's another discussion. And so I think this before and understanding the torture itself historically of colonialism, without a doubt, is important to think about. In photography, in the history of cinema itself, many films of French films and novels were all taking place in Algiers. And it's, you know, Butheina said it's not a lecture, but it's also so, I think it's so important to historicize and not to ignore so many historical points that I consider part of the trauma connected to Battle of Algiers for many sides. But also it's what happened after the revolution. You can't ignore the before and after. We can't ignore the 1990s in Algeria. We can't ignore the very fact that hundreds of thousands killed, massacred. We can talk about that later on. Some people feel the film is a premonition to that, but it's a question mark. Who is Pontecervo for me? I mean, I think one important article could be by Edward Said himself. It's called The Quest for Pontecervo. And it was a very tense interview for both of them. And I think Pontecervo, I mean, Said really emphasizes how Pontecervo himself really still believed in the values that the film portrayed. Pontecervo's position on Palestine was very firm. He didn't believe it connected anything to his identity as a Jew. Said, obviously himself a musician, was quite fascinated and learned of the hours that he and Solanas, his co-writer, took in working on the music of the film. At that time, Ennio Morricone, Allah yirhamu, or God let him rest in peace, he was just beginning. And so it's quite interesting to see that relationship that Pontecervo has talked about. I mean, Said himself also has a question that he ends the article with that I thought was interesting. And he says, is there ever a conclusive victory against empire? Does revolutionary violence have the capacity to teach future generations something more than the almost mechanical necessity of violent struggle? And that really echoes in me also. Now, as a film, many times when you teach it, even in critical articles, everyone says it's a documentary, right? And Muhammad, you referred to that both the directors, the screenwriters wanted to use old footage to make it look like that. But no, it's not a documentary for sure. And really, if we want to connect it to specific film schools, it's connected to the Soviet cinema of Ziggy Vertov and Eisenstein that wanted to create a revolution in things like montage and editing. And it's connected to the neorealism that come from many great Italian directors, whether it's Rossellini to Fellini. One great article by Cesare Zavattini says the term neorealism in a very Latin sense implies to elimination of technical professional apparatus, screenwriter included. Handbooks, formulas, grammars have no more application. There will be no more technical terms. Everybody has his personal shooting script. Neorealism breaks all the rules, rejects all those canons, which in fact exist only to codify limitations. Reality breaks all the rules, as can be discovered if you walk out with a camera to meet it. And yes, they went to locations, they used non-professional actors in their cinema, and I'll talk about that later. They wanted to appear even more than real. Was it real enough? Was the torture real enough? Do you need hyper real? Do you need the funny games of a Michael Haneke? Do you need some other type of cinema to break through this thing called torture? I'm going back to my very first point in that legacy. It's not just neorealism, however, which was so important in confronting things from the Holocaust to World War II, so on and so forth, but it was also connected to a movement called Third Cinema that believed in collectivity, that believed in breaking down the system of the auteur, like Pontecervo is the artist who created this film. No, it's a cinema of the collective. Pontekervo himself wanted to make the main character the Algerian people. More on that also. Was it just him and his co-writer Solinas? We'll see. I also want to say that this is an Arab film. It tends to sometimes an Algerian film and connected to many movements in the Arab world, like the Palestinian film movement, like the Syrian filmmakers, Omar Amir Elai, to the film. My film is on a filmmaker by the name of Mohamed Malas, who was very influenced by this movement in the film Quneitra 74, for example. And Algerian cinema itself was growing and growing in that period. One big question mark I have, and it's been elided or ignored by some critics, is that we know that one of the characters in the film is a non-professional actor, was a revolutionary himself, an FLN activist. His name was Saadi Yacef or Yusuf, but he is ignored. According to his narrative, he actually co-wrote the film. He was part of it. He was himself in prison. Some people blame him for being tortured and giving away Ali Le Point, but he went and blamed other people. I mean, what happens after the film is just as fascinating in his many films, and I think that's a fascinating discussion. But I want to emphasize his role because he was a non-professional actor, and Pontekervo insisted on working with him. Lastly, I have so much to say. Pontekervo said that he's not sure that film can show the subtlety of all the complications. And that's why one of the reasons he told Said he didn't want to work on Palestine, even though he was very pro-Palestine on some level. I'm not sure he's right. I'm not sure that cinema can't show the subtleties of the written word, of the script in documentary. Perhaps it was important to be strategically essential at the time, to show a Manichaean divide between the Kasbah and the city in the film, both artistically, cinematically, and I think that's what it was. But now I wonder if we have to have the strategic essentialism. Could we do better with gender, right? Only 15 minutes of the film out of 120 were focused on women, even though the last scene obviously is famous. We can talk about it. Did it show the diversity of Algerians enough? And I criticize early Algerian cinema and Pontekervo for not showing this diversity, perhaps. I'm not blaming him, but I'm being critical of it. Please understand that. Also, us academics, myself, I've taught it, my professors taught it, their professors taught it. Could we have not been more inclusive of Algerian and other Arab cinema of the time? And I want to stop there. I'm sorry if I took too long, Butheina, and thank you for listening, everyone.
Not at all. Thank you, Nizar, for that. And I want to go back to that. I guess this is a great time to hand over the baton, since we're using that, that filmic reference even in this conversation, a film that has also perhaps not gotten its fair share of recognition in this context. To Amin, who is perhaps, I know you have a video that you will cue me to play, but I'll just hand over the mic to you, and you can cue me whenever you're ready.
Yeah, thank you, Butheina, thank you, Jadaliyya, for the invitation, Cinema Akil, and happy to meet all of you. Nizar gave me a good transition, which is legacy, actually. This legacy that are transmitted by films, by images, and that sometimes we need to question, actually. And so this opportunity to discuss the Battle of Algiers also gave me the chance to see the film again. It's been a long time that I didn't watch it, actually. And I watched it a lot of times when I was young, because the film was more often broadcasted in the Algerian television. Unfortunately, not on cinema, but this is another question that maybe we can talk about it later. So basically, when I watched the film, I remember something something comes to my mind. It's like when I was a kid, I always thought that war was a time of our past. I thought it was like a day or a year, you know, something temporal, but never really linked to a specific place. I think that's why that was because as kids we grew up actually with a lot of images of war, conflicts, and sometimes it's super easy to confuse those images. Sometimes they are close to us because the conflicts are close to us, and sometimes they are super far from us, and also because of the images of wars that are fabricated with by films, you know, by cinema. Basically, I thought that the past wars existed only in black and white. I really like this idea because as a kid, I thought maybe, when I reflect about it, I thought maybe because the past would be in black and white and the present, and we evolved into a present in colors, you know, and that the past will never come back because if it means that the black and white will be back. So this black and white actually idea brought me to this aesthetic, the strong aesthetics of war films, which was actually in the 60s and the 50s and the 70s was very strong because it was in two colors. And I think the Battle of Algiers is a perfect also example of how strong those images can be once this topic is identified in two colors, you know, black and white, darkness and light, and good and evil. But for me, Battle of Algiers, maybe it was not the case when I watched it the first time because I was a kid, but Battle of Algiers blurry the borders between good and evil. And this is a big question also. I wanted to ask it to you. Do you think it's blurry those lines, or you think it's a very Manichaean movie? But I think for me, it shows sometimes what it takes to resist, what it takes to be in an act of resistance. And basically, in the Algerian cinema, sometimes it's really hard, and sometimes we never saw actually in the 60s and 70s, in the film produced by the Algerian state. We never saw Algerians killing other Algerians, you know, for example. So back to this idea of those films. I think it was important. The Battle of Algiers was important to Algeria as a country because it was an emergency. Actually, war films in general were produced as an emergency tool to fabricate the national narrative, which is very essential to a nation to survive after a conflict, you know. For example, to survive a war lose, a battle, a pride, and finally an identity, actually, because this is what we lose the most when we lose a war. So the young Algerian Republic felt this need to create an anti-colonialist narrative because it was also the Algerian state who are in the 60s and 70s created two big production and distribution companies that produced those kind of films. I think it was like dozen films about the independence war in the 80s and the 90s, because it was everything stops because of it was a crisis. I mean, an economic crisis in Algeria. It was an intense political environment. And once the situation get better with the oil rates getting higher in the 2000s, the state again, after the Black Decade, so after 10 years of intense and violent, traumatic, decade, but the state didn't want to talk about it, but they prefer to produce again more films with really, really big budgets that actually, in a way, turned this anti-colonialist narrative into a national mythology, and basically shaped the figure of the Algerian hero in a way. So maybe Butheina, you can show an image of my film, because this is question as a filmmaker, it's really important for me as an Algerian filmmaker. And I wanted to tackle this question in particular in a scene that we're gonna see now. It's 2-minute scene from my film, and maybe we can talk about it just after.
All right,
So,
I'm gonna share my screen now. Just tell me if you can see it. Can you see the film?
It's working. Yep.
Yep. All right. Can you hear the audio?
No, actually.
Okay, let me do that then. Sorry about that. It's have to make sure that it's picking up the audio from the system. Tell me if you can hear it now.
It's still, I think, no. So maybe maybe the sound is low. It's too low. I don't know.
It's on full right now, but I'll just try it one more time. Yeah, sorry. It's I just need to try this. Okay.
I think that's a problem with the sound, actually, still for me. Maybe we can just share the link. Worst case.
Butheina, there's a suggestion from an attendee about stopping the screen sharing and doing it again, and then click on use computer audio. You want to try that maybe?
In the meantime, I mean, do you want to tell us a bit about your film while I just try this again?
Sure. So yeah, I will tell you a bit about this scene actually. Well, in my film, I was interested into explore this question of the emotional identity of the Algerians actually, and of my generation of Algerians who lived the Black Decade. In a way, how this trauma is deeply affecting our emotions and the way we express our feelings. And to arrive to this question, I thought it was important for me to see and to explore this idea of how the Algerian films that we produced in the 60s and 70s, in a way, participated into shaping the figure of the hero who must be a freedom fighter and not a lover in a way. So basically, this is the idea behind this scene, which I just completely spoiled it actually, because it's part of it is my voice over. But I'm using a reference in the film. I'm using a reference of a film about the revolution, the Revolution War, in order to show it. So I can't do more, Butheina, otherwise I will tell you the scene.
No, yeah, no. Let me try this one more time, and if it doesn't work, then what I'll do is I'll share the link to the clip
Yes.
on Vimeo, so everybody can tune in after.
Yes.
All right.
That,
here we go. Like I was saying, you know, when I realized I was on mute, this is why we still insist on, no matter how much, you know, how many VOD and virtual cinema alternatives there are, you know, we still insist on the purity of the big screen as it stands for moments, to avoid moments like this. So I apologize for that.
Yeah, I'll try it again.
جانيتو هي قصة حب قبل كل شيء. تذكرني بالمشاعر الأولى، بالنظرات الأولى، بالحب الأول. ماشي مجاهد.
I hope you heard that as clearly as possible in this medium.
Thank you, Butheina. I don't know, but I don't know if you heard well. It was a bit, for me, it was a bit difficult. But in a way, this idea is this scene. I watched it when I was young, and it was I was a bit traumatized by this scene because it was a scene from another from an Algerian film about the independence war, which is L'opium et le bâton, العفيون والعصا. And it's the scene where Ali, another hero named Ali, is also it's executed by the French at the end of the film, and you have his, you know, all the village is witnessing this. And I think what really affects me a lot in this scene, it's the mother who's saying his name, and I think it's helped me a lot since I was young, but until now, I mean, and I thought when I was doing this film and this scene, that this scene in a way, you know, I saw it as it's like I don't know, as like a hunting ghost who's going from our images, our TV, to all the city, to in a way to hunt all the city and hunt our existence. So this is how I see a bit the legacy of of independence war films made by Algeria. And I wanted also, it's not on the scene, but for example, you know, you see the figure of the hero who needs to be you know, need to sacrifice himself for the country, for la patrie, and At the same time, you know, the women role is a bit reduced to the one who always cry, you know. And so those topics, you know, were really in my mind while I was doing this scene. I think we need heroes. And to come back to the Battle of Algiers, but these heroes, we need to question them, just like legacies, you know. So I will just finish on the first scene, basically, on one of the first scene of the 5th minute of the film of Battle of Algiers, which is how Pontecorvo actually showed those heroes finally, after all, in the dark, you know, with their faces illuminated. In a way, they look like Greek gods, you know, they look eternal. And I think it's one of I was fascinated by as a kid, I was really fascinated by this scene, because they were like, they weren't talking, they were like statues, you know, they were like statues of Greek gods. And basically the film starts, as Nizar said, with a torture scene that we don't see. So I'm not sure, because maybe my version, there was not torture, but I think there's no torture scene. We just show the after the torture scene in the beginning of the film. And I thought it was an interesting choice to start with the person who, after all, betrayed the heroes, and not start with the heroes. In a way, it's like you are doing a movie about Jesus and you start with Judah, you know, Judah. So for me, it was like, okay, I like this choice. And also because a last question, and I will stop. It's, for me, it's also how you know, we fabricate this image of hero. And you know, Pontecorvo is Italian, and he's participated into, you know, creating this perfect image of an Algerian hero. I'm really fascinated by that, by how, you know, this, let's say it, you know, this foreign, you know, outside gaze is also shaping our, our legacies in a way. When I meet a lot of people from, you know, all over the world, and when I said I'm from Algeria, they said, oh, Albert Camus, L'Étranger, and the Battle of Algiers. And both are not really Algerian, you know? So basically, for me, it's a really important question to raise. Thank you.
I mean, I have so many questions to bounce back at you from both the clip. Again, you know, I apologize for the quality of the sound, but I think either way, we'll share the link of the Vimeo for participants to have a closer look. It is a film, and Ahmed Rashidi's film is one of the films that, you know, we were kind of talking about yesterday in our brief discussion. You know, that films that didn't, again, you know, get that sort of significance in the way in the portrayal of the global sort of mind or imagination of the Battle of Algiers and the Algerian struggle for liberation. And you did mention a lot of different things. I mean, specifically, Miriam, you were talking yesterday about your particular gravitation to the depiction of women, the women in the film, the female characters. And the aesthetics of that. I mean, in your work, you know, you work in the world of of luxury. You work in the world of infusing, almost injecting these images that are derived somehow, you know, from these works, that have roots in post-colonial theory or post-colonial image making and cultural production, and somehow you find a way of you're engaged in the work of making them accessible, making them, translating them, and sometimes maybe enforcing them. So I know you have a lot to to draw on and share, specifically with your latest series on Mil. So I'll hand the mic over to you to share with us some of your work, and feel free to introduce Mil more elaborately than I did.
Thank you so much. I think you did an amazing introduction. Thank you, Butheina, for inviting me to be part of such a beautiful panel. Thank you, Mohammed. Congratulations on the relaunch of the page. I've been actually dragging myself to Facebook today because I haven't been for a long time, and it helped me actually discover the whole page and what you've been doing, and what I missed in June actually on the RAI, Revolutionary RAI page that you've done. Really appreciative of that. Today, what I wanted, actually, it's a beautiful, the way you've been doing the transition are actually amazing, Butheina, thank you. Following Nizar and Amin, the depiction of women in a positive manner, for me, I've seen two sides of it when I rewatched the movie. And God knows it's been a long time, and you're right, the only time that I remember watching it, I was really young during the summer on the Algerian TV at my grandmother, when we used to go back and forth and stay 3 months. And you arrive, you start speaking French, you look like an outcast, and 3 months later you have no shoes, you're running everywhere, and you're the most happiest kid in Algeria. And I've been missing this a lot. So I want to share my screen first to show you what struck me compared to the work that I do today with Sophia, who's the founder of Mil. I'm the co-founder. We have a beautiful team of 10 young people that are based in Tunis. Tunis, like we have 50% of our team based in Tunis, but as well in London, Paris. They're all from Arab origin. Not that we're not welcoming anyone else from the outside world, but I think it was our pride to give a new voice, you know, to the culture, to the Arab world in our own way, in our niche way, I would say. So I will allow myself now to share my screen to show you first the beautiful image of the women and the usage of women that has been done actually in the movie and of Gilo. Who I was still listening to today in his approach and how he created the different scene. And what struck me the most was the bomb scenes. The bomb scenes that are actually orchestrated by the agility of the women, of going through the barrage that we call in Algeria. And this reminded me actually of my childhood, where I used to come from the airport with my parents during the Black Decade, where my dad was not really happy that my mom was still encouraging us to go and to visit the family. Still, we wanted to be there during the summer. It was late 90s, the feast, Abbasi Madani. I remember it was even the time where Diana passed away. It was kind of a critical moment for me as a young woman. I was not even 20. Tell me if you can see my screen. I don't want to do video. I just want to show what struck me the most going through actually the different photo. Do you all see my screen?
Yes.
For me, the most striking moment is this one, is when the 3 ladies with Hasiba and this lady in particular, the scene starts, you all remember, she has a hayek, the famous beautiful white hayek that my mom, when I was younger, used to wear when we used to go to Algeria's, and remove it obviously when we were in Paris. I'm saying obviously because there's this contradiction in us Algerians. And this woman start with very black hair, long, tied up in this kind of like, it's almost if she has a qardoon. Qardoon used to be this long fabric that we used to tie very, very strongly the hair of the women, so we don't have to actually blow dry it or use any mechanical way of making our hair. And this woman here you see is blonde and has short hair. She started the scene to prepare herself, and she is mesmerized by Hasiba. Hasiba, who you can see has more European look than the 2 other women that would be used here. And it's as if they're partnering, they're sisters in this revolution. But what struck me the most is the way they were looking at each other as if there was a hidden jealousy of her beauty, of not being able to actually like just go with the flow, take the bomb, go down the street and do her work. She had to actually create a role for herself. When Saadi Yacef enters the scene and try to test them by talking to them, she's the first one to talk, the one who has literally put bleach on her hair and created a whole new story. And the second one, who looks very much more like a Mazir lady from Tizi Ouzou, who just lives in the Kasbah, you can see Hasiba in the middle looks like a beautiful Italian woman, as if it's done on purpose to create kind of a tension between the two. So this was one of the scenes that actually struck me the most. Not as
Miriam, sorry, I hate to cut you up here. I want to continue this part of the conversation. And I want to come back because I'm really curious to see, I think the recently launched page of the Women of the Algerian Revolution series that you did on Nil. I just want to throw the mic to Hisham before he heads off, because he has an appointment right now and we're operating on different time zones. So I just would love to hear from him for a bit, and then we'll come back and continue the conversation. Thank you for understanding. Hisham, over to you, and thanks for sticking around.
No problem. Thank you all. And Miriam, I was really enjoying what you were saying. So I'll stick around to hear that. Hi, everyone. Hello from New York. I mean, what I want to talk about, at least, so I watched this film as a teenager, and I grew up next door to Algeria, right? And so, you know, the revolution was very interesting, you know, and its impact across the Maghreb. But what I want to talk about in the minutes that I have is the link between the Algerian Revolution, Frantz Fanon, and Black Power, on the one hand, and on the other hand, the Algerian Revolution, the film, the Battle of Algiers' impact in Latin America, right? So just to talk about the Black Power angle, I've lived here in Harlem for almost 30 years, and I've met many elders who were part of the Panther movement, who were in the Black Power movement, and so on, for whom this film is very important, and to understand the links, the ties of solidarity between the Algerian struggle and the Black Freedom Movement, we need to go back to the 1930s or 1920s, because that's when you get an African-American community forming in Paris after World War I, and a number of writers and scholars and artists would come down to North Africa, right? Some of the earliest, most fascinating writing about Algiers, the Qswa of Algiers in the 1920s, is Jessie Fawcett, who was an important figure here in the Harlem Renaissance, a poet, writer, novelist. She wrote some wonderful stuff, Alger la Blanche, right, on being a black woman in a city that's called La Blanche. Then you started getting other writers. In 1959, you got Hoyt Fuller, who was editor of the Negro Digest. Right? He had a contact from an Algerian fighter in Paris who told him, you got to go visit the Kasbah, and here's someone you should talk to. The French police don't let him in. So he comes back later, enters through a different area. The police catch him. They tell him, aren't you worried? Aren't you scared? And he says, look, I'm a black man. The Algerians have no problem with me. It's the same struggle, right? So this is the beginning of the linking of these struggles. And then, of course, you get Algerian independence, 1962. Ben Bella comes to New York. And at the United Nations, he meets with Martin Luther King. It's covered by the magazine Muhammad Speaks, which is the Nation of Islam's publication. And Algeria becomes as significant as the struggle in Ghana or the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya in black politics in America, right? So Ben Bella comes Midtown, he meets Martin Luther King, then he goes uptown and he meets with Malcolm X, right? This is 1962. 1964, Malcolm goes back to Algeria, right? Visits the Qsba, and he would give two speeches, right? He would come back and give two speeches. First one on the Blood Brothers, right? Where he talks about what he learned from Algeria, the Qsba of Algeria, the importance of solidarity and how segregation and oppression and injustice creates a blood brotherhood, right? That's speech number one. The second speech, The Ballot or the Bullet, given April, May 1964 in Ohio, is where he talks about the birth of guerrilla war in Algeria, in the Kasbah of Algiers. And he says, General de Gaulle, with all his highfalutin, the phrase he uses, all his highfalutin machinery cannot deal with this urban guerrilla warfare, right? Now, I mentioned Malcolm X because we know that Pontecorvo came to Algeria in 1962 for independence, right? And that's when then he would begin his research. We know that Pontecorvo was deeply influenced by Fanon and read a lot of Fanon, and you see the Fanonist influence in the film, right? Where there's the armed struggle, where there's the need to politicize the proletariat, the argument that violence can help self-actualize and restore dignity. At one point, I think Ali Lapointe trips and falls, right? Somebody trips him, and he stands up and he punches the guy in the face. And instead of running, right, he stays there to confront the police and so on, right? It's a very Fanonian moment in some ways. So we're aware of Pontecorvo, of the influence on Fanon on Pontecorvo, right? And he was, after all, very close to Saadi Yacef, who's the author of the book that inspired the film. But in terms of Pontecorvo and Malcolm, we don't know if he overlapped with Malcolm X, if they knew each other. But he must have been aware. And there is, and I've had I've seen some scholars argue that this was partly inspired by Malcolm's speeches on guerrilla warfare, and that the trajectory of Ali Lapointe parallels that of Malcolm X, right? Where you have sort of a petty criminal, petty thief who goes to prison. In prison, he undergoes he goes through a political baptism, a revolutionary transformation, ideological transformation, and becomes a revolutionary, right? It's Fanonian, but it's again the figure of Ali Lapointe, right? Sort of the rise from the bottom, right? So all to say is there's a lot to unpack, a lot to disentangle here, and between Malcolm, Fanon, and Pontecorvo. As soon as the film comes out in 1966, right, the Black Power movement has just been born. Historian Ronald Walters writes about this. The Black Panthers start to screen the film in their local chapters and assign Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth, right, which is described as the handbook of the revolution. Stokely Carmichael will refer to Fanon as my patron saint. And this is something else. So we're aware that left-wing groups, anti-colonial groups take inspiration from this film. Right? This film is screened by the IRA. The film is screened by the Tamil Tigers. The film is screened by Sendero Luminoso in Latin America, The Shining Path, but also by the authorities, right? State authorities, occupiers, law enforcement, right? And in the U.S., I think it was in the U.S. where law enforcement became very worried about this film, right? In 1967, there were the Detroit riots, right? And then the Newark riots. And Newsweek would write a piece saying, did the Battle of Algiers play a role in this, right? So there's that aspect. And then in 1969, you get the trial of the Panthers 21 here in New York, right? Where Afani Shakur, who would become Tupac Shakur's father, he and a number of other Panthers who were accused of planning violence. The prosecution said they were inspired by the Battle of Algiers, that they saw it as a battle plan, right? And so it's, in the U.S., you begin to get Black Power movements that see this film as necessary for liberation. One of the detainees, actually, from the Panther 21, said that one idea that was attractive from the film was that to join the FLN, you had to kill a cop, right? This would be adopted by Shining Path, Sendero Luminoso in Peru, right? So the debate is ongoing around Fanon and Black Power. I just want to mention the Latin American angle. This film appears, so the Algerian Revolution begins 1954. right? The revolutionaries in Cuba, right? Fidel Castro and his band are watching it very, very carefully, right? They end up toppling Batista before the Algerians gain independence, right? And Fidel Castro would direct his attention towards supporting the Algerian Revolution and so on. But this was a period where you had enormous intellectual exchange between Latin America and the Arab world, right? Part of it was intellectual, theoretical. You had the writer, the theorist Samir Amin, an Egyptian Marxist economist who wrote his PhD at Sorbonne in 1955. Dependency theory, basically applying Marxist theory to understand international relations, how the first world exploits the third world, and so on. But Fidel Castro would come to power and latch onto this, right? So dependencia, born in Cairo via Paris, becomes in some ways the theory of the Cuban Revolution. So when this film came out, Cuba was one of the first to celebrate it, right? They got Hollywood, they were nominated for an Oscar and so on, but some of the earliest awards came from Cuba and from Mexico, right? The Latin American left. And this is an important point. There is a line in the film that's drawn from Che Guevara's speeches, right? There's a line at one point, Ben Mehdi, who's played by Saadi Yacef, is in prison and talking to Ali Lapointe about what it takes to create a revolution. It's easy to start one, it's harder to continue it, it's even harder to win, right? That's drawn from Che Guevara, right? And of course, Che Guevara comes to power and they travel to, when Che Guevara and Fidel Castro come to power, they travel to Algiers, right? That's the first place where Cuba would begin supporting anti-colonial movements, would be in Algeria, and then spreading downwards Congo and so on. But so the Latin American left gains an interest in this film, right? But also the right, right? And one of the most interesting revelations with the rise of the new Argentine Pope, what is his name? Whatever, I forget the Pope's name. The current very cool left-wing Pope. He's been accused of being involved with dirty wars in Argentina and so on. And one of the things that's come out recently, right, is that the generals who came to power in Argentina in the late 60s, in military academies, they were screening the Battle of Algiers, right? Particularly the torture sequences, because the film is so brilliantly done. It's like a documentary. It begins with a disclaimer that this is not a documentary, it's a newsreel. But at some point, when the French, one of the French colonels is speaking, it's like you're sitting in a seminar on counterinsurgency, right? So we know that after the Iraq War, the Pentagon was screening it. After the Second Intifada, the IDF was screening this film. But it begins in Latin America in the late 60s when Operation Condor has yet to be developed, but as a way to crack down on the left, right? So there are multiple connections here, right? So there's, just in terms, I'm talking about the transatlantic, you have the Black Power connection, but also the OAS, which are the Algerian paramilitaries, were blowing up cafes as well, and these are the settlers who wanted to stay in Algeria. The first place that they set up outside of Europe was in Buenos Aires, right? They found enormous sympathy among the Argentine military, right? And within the Catholic Church, right? So some of the stuff that has come out since the new Pope was invested was that there were a number of cardinals who were also interested in the role of this film in what would be called the Dirty War, right? In fact, one Argentine ex-president would say that 1976, this is when there was a military coup in Algeria, he says basically, La Batalla de Buenos Aires, the Battle of Buenos Aires, was the Battle of Algiers. When the military came to power, the tactics they deployed were basically those that had been deployed in Argentina. I'll stick around a few more minutes. I don't want to monopolize time. I'll just say, in terms of the influence of Fanon and Pontecorvo is fascinating. Sitting here in New York and in neighboring between New York and neighboring Morocco, what's interesting is the role of how this film, its iconology, its symbolism have been tapped. I mean, Amin can talk about this, by the new Algerian generation, by the activists today in Algeria, right? And it is gratifying to see the pictures of Ali Lapointe and Jamila and so on election booths and flags, and people addressing Ali Lapointe, right? So yes, there's the external gaze, but I would say the film, I mean, has been indigenized in some ways, right? It's become part of a local discourse. I'll stop there. I'll stick around for a few more minutes. Thank you.
I mean, thank you, Hisham. I mean, do you want to respond to that? Do you want to react to the prevalence or the resurgence, I guess, of the images from the film and the characters in the film in the current revolutionary moment in Algeria?
Yeah,
And Hisham,
yes,
I'm also curious about if there's any connection or reflections that you have on the current BLM movement in the US and the impact perhaps of the reverberations of the historical memory and connection to the film on today's street.
Thank you, Butheina. I would do this quickly. Thank you, Hisham. It's very interesting, and just to add something before I go to the demonstrations. It's also really important to notice that, to mention that politics and cinema, even it's not I mean, in this case, it's definitely a political film, but is there a film which is not political? I'm not sure. So basically, with all those events, international events happening around the film, before the film, after the film, around the film, we need also to mention that during the shooting of the Battle of Algiers, there was a coup happening in Algeria at the same time. The colonel Boumediene at that time prepared the coup and started just few days, I think, after the Battle of Algiers start shooting, and people on the street don't even realize it's a coup. It's just such an amazing story. Like, people think it's those are Pontecorvo's decor and tanks, but it was like Colonel Boumediene who was doing a coup against Ben Bella, and it's like. Yeah, and also, I think Yacef Saadi also plays a role in this.
Yeah, that's right. So Yacef, I remember that. People thought Pontecorvo was still filming, but it was actually a coup underway. No, Yacef Saadi is he came to New York in 2011 during the Arab Spring. I think he's now 92. He came in his early 80s, and he was incredible. So I mean, I just want to say just the impact of this film on the current protests, but on also current film projects. I mentioned earlier that the Detroit riots happened, and Newsweek thinks the Battle of Algiers inspired them, right? But then when the film Detroit came out in 2017, the 50-year anniversary of the riots, the filmmaker modeled her film. It was very much a Pontecorvo style thing, right? Other films. I mean, you're aware of Zeba, Costa Gavras, and so on. But City of God, and the favelas of the Sao Paulo or Rio, I believe, also has that element. The Wire, right? Sort of the deep, immersive, slow burn thing. And so, I mean, that's the dynamic that's incredible, is that left-wingers find it useful, but also the authorities, the oppressors, find it useful. And this is a contradiction that Pontecorvo sort of put into the film from the start, in that he made the oppressors, the French general, was actually a resistance fighter against the Nazis. Right? The argument is that you may be a progressive on European soil. Once you go to the colonies, like the guillotine, you become a reactionary figure. Mariam, I'm interested, since you're. May I ask a question, Butheina? Yeah. So
please go ahead. Yeah.
Since you're in the world of the arts and fashion and so on. Here in the US, at some point around 2011, with the Arab Spring and so on, a number of fashion houses started releasing Battle of Algiers jackets, shirts, scarves, khaki shirts with the Paula's camouflage pants, and even like fashionable turbans. Um, the Iraq War wasn't going well, so might as well celebrate Algiers, right?
Even go further, I think some of the style they were mixing, if I may say, without insulting any fashion house, they were even mixing the references between Battle of Algiers and some of the Black Panther style and the revolutionary ball effect, like you said, where I was impressed. Thank you so much for saying what you said just before. Remembering that Algeria has been a great friend of all of those movements, whether it was the Black movement with the Black Panthers that were invited to Algeria, whether it was all of that. And yes, in this moment in the US, it was crazy how I get that a fashion designer can go on, and I think my partner Sophia would have even more to say about that than I do. She has a great sense of style and she's a great creative. I'm more of a strategist at Mille. But what I do know is how they inspire themselves from movies most of the time. Every time you read an interview from a fashion designer, every time Jean-Paul Gaultier, for instance, has inspired himself from so many. I used to be a trainee, like it was my first experience. Such a nice guy, and I remember I was running between studios. Like my job was like to bring coffee, to bring this, but I was learning. And I remember in the fashion world how beautiful as it seems when I was younger. What I was hearing was that the studio was piling up VCR, VHS, cassette of only movies from war because the costumes were great. And I think it goes without saying that fashion designers in the US, I agree with you, Hisham, were also inspiring themselves. Were they lacking of inspiration? Were they doing it for the right momentum? I'm not sure. But God knows that they sold a lot on the like we say in Algeria, Dahr al-Jazair. Continuing on transitioning on what I was saying earlier, I was telling you that what really struck me was the contradiction within the movie in a positive manner on how the women were used, weaponized. They were weapons. And weapons that seemed to be so fragile, at the same time seductive, that could pass any barrage, any place that would actually just make forget the army, the gendarmes, the policemen that were guarding the entrance of the Kasbah. And in a way, Pontokervo is actually doing a small insult to, it's a small response and a small insult for me to those men, like thinking that they would not make the difference between an Algerian woman, how beautiful how they are, and a French colon. So this was my first side. And then what struck me very much is the way they were carrying the bombs. Do you remember the bags? The bags look like actually like nowadays beautiful collection that you were saying, Hisham, just before fashion again, where the person that was behind that, working closely to Solinas and Pontecorvo and the entire team, they made an amazing, I'm sorry, I have a different eye than you guys, but the set design, with the means they had in the Kasbah being so real, like you said, the message at the beginning of the movie saying, there's no documentary here, everything is real. The set was just proper. The bags that look like a Prada from last year, and like those pieces that actually were just hiding bombs. The way she sat at the bar where the gentleman is asking her if she wants to take a seat. Again, I'm talking about Hasiba and her Italian look. And you see where the diversity and inclusion in, I don't know if it was a message from the director to show us that Algerian are a mix, and God knows we are a mix. We come from so many different places, like it's not just the 130 or 150 years of colonization from France to Algeria, but it's also what happened before. So this was my point of view. And I wanted to make a small conclusion without taking too much of your time and taking you on our website and on the last piece that we have done. We have actually depicted 7 Algerian young creative to follow on the social media. So I'm gonna just share my screen with you, make you discover our proud Meal World. Again, our friend who was cutting, the FLN woman who was cutting her hair and became blonde and beautiful to pass the bomb. So here's the latest article that our team has just actually pushed. If you go on Meal World, it's very sleek, very simple website, straightforward. We didn't want to make it too much. Arab can be beautiful compared to whatever we've heard in the past, and this is only my opinion. And here's Sarah, 13 hours ago, who's one of our writers and also part of our creative team, who wanted to share with our audience the different creative and Algerian, the new generation. And of course, our muse, Lina Khoudri, who has played an amazing role on Papisha, that most of you, I'm sure, have seen. I cried during the whole movie. This is how we bonded, I believe, with Butheina. So this is for me. This is my, without being a feminist, and God knows I'm not. I'm just an Algerian pride to be, with a pride living in the Middle East that taught me to be more Arab than ever. Being born in France and having the heart between the two countries, it can actually change your mind sometimes. And Arab world actually, throughout my different travels, my different encounters, has completely changed my mind and the way I see things now, whether it's Algeria or the Arab world in general, culturally. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Miriam, for sharing that. And we'll be sharing all the links of the articles as a follow-up as well to this discussion. We're going to move over quick to Q&A. I'm going to get rid of all my questions because I think I'm really curious to hear as much of you as you can give. I know that we've gone over time. And I know, Hisham, you have to leave soon, but perhaps before you go, if you can make Nizar the host on the chat so we can turn his video on, and maybe you can share with us just some of the, you mentioned a lot of references. I wanted to just ask every one of the participants to share a short, anthology as a follow-up almost to this discussion of accompanying films or texts that they should check out, and we're going to be compiling all of those in the chat and the follow-up piece, but with in collaboration with the Jadaliyya team.
We have lots of questions. So I don't know if we'll be able to get through them, but I'll start chronologically from the first questions that we got. There was first a comment by Rafiq Tatwari, who saw the film first in 1967 at the Palladium, which was Kashmir Cinema Paradiso, which was subsequently demolished, and now an army bunker marks that memory. And here he is 70 years later in New York City, still fighting the battle for Kashmir. So so that was the comment. And then there's a question about Nizar's point, and I don't know if we can get Nizar on camera, if Hisham has been able to make him a host. Yeah, if Hisham, you could just try and get Nizar as the host, then we can
you just have to click his name and make host. On the top right corner, under panelists tab.
Okay. That's it. I did it.
Done? Perfect.
Okay, great.
Thank you for joining. I know you have to leave.
No problem.
Thank you, Hisham.
Thank you, Hisham. You're great. Your books are great too. Your book is great too. Thanks.
Bye.
So Nizar,
yeah,
there's a question
I saw the
directed to you.
question.
Okay, great.
Yeah, no, I think this idea of decolonizing the archives and going through the archives and confronting the archives is so important in that question. And yes, that's one way of confronting the trauma of torture, is to actually open it up. Just yesterday, there was an article, or this morning, there was an article about finding a burial of Algerians that were buried by the French. And there's so much in the archive. There's so much denial and avoidance in collective culture. I mean, Butheina, I think one film to watch, and there's many films on the event that happened in 61 in France, when over 200 people drowned in the Seine River. This was confronted by the film by Michael Haneke, Caché, and also there was a great Algerian and another French documentary on this one event where the French government basically avoided, denied. You could add psychotherapy words into it too, sublimation, condensation, whatever you want. But it's very important to start going through the archives and making sure there's a owning up to all this torture and trauma that's been created by many sides in this long traumatic history of empire that we're still dealing with today.
Nizar, there was another question that you said you would address, which was right after that, about Camus and
yeah. I mean, I want to say that Pontecervo actually got his idea. This is an interesting tidbit from Saadi Yacef. Saadi Yacef, the film is based on his memoir. The filmmaking, the contrapuntal style between the music and the image, yes, that's created by Pontecervo and Solanas, but Saadi Yacef, according to him, was there every step of the way. He made them rewrite 3 scripts. He was there during the filmmaking, advising them the whole time. So I want to say also that Fanon, Camus, let's not see them as foreigners. Let's get rid of the word of foreigner even. I know that's dangerous, and I know that I might be criticized for this, but I think there has to be a sense of inclusion. There's room for everyone, as Said would quote from C.L.R. James, in being part of the Algerian Revolution on some way. That doesn't make them Algerian and doesn't give them more rights. But I would like to say that Battle of Algiers was also made by many Algerians, and they deserve credit. Is it a foreign film? Perhaps, but I'd also like to say that I'd like to make the point that it's not just a foreign film. I tried to say that it's an Arab film too. But I think you're right sometimes that what you're right in 100%, Salma, is that Camus or Pontecervo are given credit to be the auteur or the only director of their reality. No, that's unfair. Camus himself was part of a whole existential movement that was Arab thinkers like Albert Memé, yes, an Arab Jew, who, yes, he was anti-Palestinian on some level, but in terms of Algeria, he talked about the colonizer and the colonized. And Fanon himself, what is his identity? Yeah, let me stop there, but I would like an idea that doesn't see them as foreigners, but it might be controversial. Yeah.
No, I agree with you, Nizar, because I think that it was one of the questions I wanted to answer actually. Because when I said, I also mentioned the fact that they are not really Algerian. I thought about what you just said, because I don't want, I'm meeting a lot of people, and the 2 people from Algeria that I know, technically they are not Algerian, but I want them to know Asia Jabbar, for example. I wanted to know people who really also part of our identity. And that's exactly what I wanted to say, but in another way, because I think the questions also mentioned France Fanon, which actually, of course, is part of the struggle that the Algerians lived, and his contribution is just endless, But the thing is, like, the idea that I wanted to say is that the fact that those people embrace the cause in a way, it just means simply that the resistance, the revolution, you know, fighting for values, for and causes that matter, it make it humanist and universal. And this is exactly what I wanted to say. It's like they are part of it, but as you said, I just
with an external
I want to let's question everything. And this is my I don't like to always say, oh, okay, it's like, you know, black and white. It's never black and white. So let's question everything. That's why I said they are not really Algerian, actually.
I have a question, Amin, that was directed to you that I'd like to put to you. The question is, if you've already read or watched, forgive my horrible French here, C'est que le jour doit à la nuit, by Yasmina Khadra. And to what extent do you think the story presented the identities that Algerians have fought with during that time and are still doing in the present moment?
So yeah, basically, I didn't have the chance to read Yasmina Khadra, Ce que le jour doit à la nuit. And the film was, I know the film was directed by Alexandre Arcadi, who is a French director, which was for me a reason to not watch it, to be quite honest. But what I wanted, the little things that I know about the book and the film is that there's another image of the independence war that were shown in the film, showing actually the relationship between the colon and the local population, which is maybe not really showed a lot in the other films. But it's remind me, so sorry, I can't say more about this film, but when I was young, I watched De Hollywood Ataman Rasset. It's a film from Mohammed Zamouri. It's a very, it's a comedy. It's like Italian comedy. It's shot in my hometown in Butheina, actually. So the filmmaker he passed away a few years ago. But what I liked, for example, about this film, about this comedy, is the fact that for the first time I didn't have to be in a total drama in a way when I watch a film about the revolution, because it was funny, and there was also this relationship between the French population that were tackled in a different way. So for me, it was interesting. And I think it's the same thing for, I'm not saying it's funny, like Ce que le jour doit à la nuit, but I think it's another, you know, it's always good to have a lot of, you know, stories and not only the, you know, just one vision.
And I mean, allow me also to jump into it. I understand also your position regarding Alexandre Arcadi. Like my French accent comes back very strong now. It's also because we've watched, you and I and other people around us, so many movies that were so commercial made by Alexandre Arcadi with a pied noir point of view.
Exactly, yeah.
With people, I feel for them, because some people, like when they tell you their story, we took them from their home, we told them to go away, and they finally realized they didn't have a home in France because Algeria was France for them. And I completely get your point of view. And at the same time, it reminds me that a part of Arcadi, being very innocent in my 20s, in the first part of my 20s, when I was watching those movies with Patrick Bruel and Alexandre Arcadi and some other French interpretation, again, it's part of me. Whether I want to take it or not today differently, definitely I will follow what you're saying, because I think it's not fair that it's always on the other side of the sea, Mediterranean Sea, that actually people are making beautiful movie about Algeria, and not on the other side that is being made and big and beautiful. So, and the Hollywood Ataman Rasset, thank you. Biggest laughter when I was young.
Yeah, Thank you, Miriam. No, I just want to like just last thing about this, because it's very important. Like I say, stop to the denial. I mean, let's talk about everything in the movies, in the films. Let's do. I'm not against everything, even about the point of view, because cinema, it has this power, you know, to you know, to create empathy and to so you can understand the other. Finally, it's a key to understand the other. So I have nothing against Arkady. Just you know,
but it's just why not us?
Yeah, it's more like, you know, it's not my kind of films. That's the only thing.
That's fair. That's fair.
I want to make sure that I get to this question because it was asked in the chat, and I asked the person to put it in the Q&A. It was by Nagihan, and it's for any of you. What language did the director ask the actors playing the resistance to speak, since she can't make out anything watching the lips? So I wonder if the question is whether it was Darija or French, and if any of you can weigh in on that.
I have a feeling it was Darija, because the little boy, when he's sitting on the staircase, and he's next to Ali Lapointe, you can tell that the dubbing doesn't add up. And like if I speak now with Amin, it looks like it was very fast and very small. And I kept on, I asked myself the same question. I was like, what language is he speaking? Certainly not Italian. So.
No, for sure it was Darija actually. And maybe to explain what is Darija to the audience, it's like the Algerian dialect. It's the Algerian dialect, which is a mix of Arabic, Berber, French words, Spanish words sometimes. So yeah.
Nizar, did you have anything to comment on in that vein?
Well, I know that I mean, things were done in the post edit. I know that Saadi Yacef was there co-producing the film the whole time, so there were different Algerians producing it. And Darja, yeah, is the colloquial in Arabic, and it's always difficult in Arabic. You know, there's many darjas. It's not just one, even in Algeria, and there's mixes of so many different types of dialects. And yeah, I mean, that's one way where perhaps Pontecervo didn't carry out neorealism, which wanted to show all the different dialects and sounds and languages that exist in Algeria other than Arabic and French. But you know, it's difficult doing a film, and I think that's probably some decisions that had to be taken in post-production in the end to make the film have that balance or harmony and stuff like that.
I mean, a lot of the discussions that I'm seeing in the comments at the end is, you know, about the and I guess, you know, following what Amin was saying, is not to be able to, you know, to be afraid of speaking the truth and questioning that idea of truth. I think is you know, is one of the things that I was, you know, thinking about exploring, you know, before in preparation for this. I want to share an essay by the film critic Mark Cousins, published in the Prospect in 2002, where he questions the you know, sort of the importance of truth in cinema and what role truth has to play in specifically historical narrative. I'll share it you know, in the comments. I would love to just pose, you know, a quick roundup of you know, of a couple of recommendations following this conversation. I mean, we mentioned Assia Jabbar, we mentioned a few you know, filmmakers and writers and so on, and I'd just like to hear from each of you, you know, a couple of names or a couple of films, you know, or even literary works that you perhaps point the participants to as a follow-up to this discussion. Obviously, the Criterion Collection, which we shared as one of the links to watch the film, has several, you know, short documentaries, including The Dictatorship of Truth and other short documentary pieces. There is Malik bin Ismail's film about a film in history reflecting on the making of the Battle of Algiers, which is incredibly important and available to rent on Journeyman. So I'll share the link to that, and I'll use this opportunity to also invite everybody to join us at Cinema Akil through our virtual Cine Talks. Surabi Sharma from NYU Abu Dhabi is here in the participants as well, and she'll be leading, as a filmmaker and scholar of film, and will be leading a discussion on Monday, the coming Monday. So I'll share the link to that, and perhaps some of what we discussed today will carry over into that discussion. Thank you so much from my side, for all of you who took the time to take part in this conversation. I would go on for hours hearing from you, and I hand the last word over back to you all.
Thank you, everyone. I think the fact that we've gone over. Sorry, Nizar, go ahead.
No.
You wanted to give your recommendations, your list, which was my final request.
Yeah, that's what I was doing. But unless Mohammed wants to interject with some.
No, I'm sorry. I jumped the gun there. Sorry.
No. Yeah, I mean, I think there's too much to watch, but I'll go back. I think I want to thank Hisham. He's not here. He did a great job. I think there's so much in Latin American cinema that we should watch. Hours of the Furnace, Battle for Chile, all the films of Guzman, and so many other filmmakers from Latin America. But those are two to watch. Solanas is similar to the thing. But in terms of Algeria, I really would check out Emir Abdel Qadir, very famous for Algerians, but also to study his life, how he resisted the French and how he lived in Damascus and was a follower of Sufism. I would go back and look at Andalusia and the connection to Algeria. In terms of cinema, Mirzaq Alwash has been making some great films about the Harragas, about many issues that are afflicting Algeria to this day. And to broaden our connection to French colonialism and to colonialism itself, I think, yeah, to go back and read texts like Orientalism, to see how they're dissecting certain narratives of what Islam is. Even when Pontecorvo went back, he was challenged by Italian TV saying, but this is what Islam is in 1992. Look, they're after violence. They want to shut down the women. And Pontecorvo, when I watched this documentary, it's on the Criterion Collection, like Butheina said no, there's no genetic connection between Islam and, and violence. And he made that point quite clear on Italian TV when the person on TV, I forget, it's called Rai TV in Italia, RAI. I don't know if that's how it's pronounced. And so I think it's important also to watch many of the Algerian filmmakers, Chronicles of a Years of Ember by Mohamed Lakhdar Hamina. I think Amin is right to be critical of that in terms of heroes, but I think it's important to look at that history, even if it's still right now we can be critical of it. There's actually so many great Algerian documentaries out there, and that's thanks to movements in Algeria like the Bahaya and many great films that have been shown in the last 10 years in Arab film festivals. And if people are interested in this, I can give my email here and always send a big film list. There's a mention of a great Lebanese Arab Jewish filmmaker, Haini Sarour, that talks about the revolution in Oman. And that's a great film to watch to talk about the Arab revolutionary spirit.
Except that you can't find it anywhere.
Yeah, you can't.
It's very hard to find. Yeah.
You can email her and she'll send it to you. May Masri, the book in my book series, her films are important. There's a wealth of Arab cinema out there, and I encourage people to watch it and to read and to see and also to experience Algerian music. Not just Sheb Khaled, but there's many Shebs out there. And
yeah, no, please, we don't have just Sheb Khaled. I mean, tell him.
Thank you. Yeah, I know. It's Sheb, also Sheikha Remiti. Go back and listen to
my president. Yeah. President.
So I'll stop there. I know that we've gone over time, but thank you, Muhammad. Thank you, Jadaliyya. Thank you, Butheina. Thank you, Amin and Maryam, and everyone still listening.
Such a pleasure.
I hope I'll send my email. You're more than welcome to communicate with me. I'm always willing to share and debate. And Sophia, sorry, someone mentioned this, but I don't want to ignore anyone. Albert Memmi, yes. Sophia Gillett, I don't know.
My partner.
Yeah, I want to say, you're right. It's complicated, this relationship between Israel, Palestine, Zionism. And I think maybe to just discount Albert Memmi as not being pro-Palestinian is not fair. So I take back the way that I said that. It's complicated, the relationship with Arab Jews. It's not something that's the black and white. And he wasn't a black and white anti-Palestinian. So I take that back. Maybe he was Zionist, maybe not. But clearly that's something that needs to be talked about in a greater length. It's not black and white.
Maybe we should debate with Sophia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you all for your time and your contributions. It's been such a vibrant discussion. I've been getting lots of messages about how wonderful the resources and the kind of links and suggestions. It's been a very spirited and lovely conversation, and I hope that this is kind of like the beginning of some excellent kind of discussions like this, where we bring in thinkers and people like yourselves. We'll be putting on this video, a recorded version, up on the page. We'll also be sharing with everybody who signed up to the Zoom link all the links that we've been sharing. I'll compile them and we'll have them sent. And yes, Nizar, if you can put your email before we close, then people can benefit from any engagement with you. So if you just put that up in the chat, that would be great. Okay. And yeah, thank you, Butheina, for facilitating and leading this this fantastic dialogue, and we'll be definitely asking you to come back again on the page to to contribute. Thank you to all the viewers. At one point we had almost 100, including the Facebook audience, so it's just great to see this interest. And again, thank you very much, and hope to see all of you soon, and have a wonderful evening. And Nizar just put up his email address, and I shared all the other panelists' social media. I shared Amin's Twitter, Hisham's Colombia page, which has his email, Miriam, your Instagram, and Mealworld's, Butheina's Instagram as well. So please feel free to connect with us and the Jadaliyya page, and thank you all for staying on much later, and for apologies for the technical issues at the outset, but it's been well worth it. Have a wonderful evening, everyone, and may the revolution continue. Thank you.
Butheina, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Butheina.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good day and night.
We Dutch.
Yes.
Tahiyya Jazair. Okay, thanks.
Tahiyya Jazair.
Bye-bye. Yeah. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Ciao.